In 1933, while Universal Pictures was cashing in on Dracula and Frankenstein, a scrappy little studio called Majestic Pictures released something that nearly vanished into Hollywood oblivion. The vampire bat starred Fay Wray, soon to become iconic in King Kong, and the sinister Lionel Atwill, but it never reached the same heights as Universal's monster hits. Majestic operated on what insiders dubbed Poverty Row, where studios survived by borrowing, recycling, and improvising. The vampire bat sets, repurposed directly from Universal's The Old Dark House and Frankenstein. The budget? So tight it practically groaned. Yet director Frank Strayer managed to conjure a genuinely eerie atmosphere, with lighting techniques later admired by horror aficionados for their moody brilliance. By the 1950s and 60s, original prints of the vampire bat had become scarce. The film endured thanks to public domain TV airings, and later bootleg VHS tapes passed among collectors in the 70s and 80s. These grainy copies became the film's lifeline, treasured and traded like cinematic contraband. Its true revival came in the 1990s when private collectors and archives began restoring and showcasing improved prints. Film festivals reintroduced the vampire bat to new audiences, and critics began to reassess its shadowy charm. Once dismissed as a knockoff, it's now celebrated as a cult gem among pre-code horror fans, proof that forgotten films can hold the most intriguing secrets. In 1955, a film emerged from the shadows of Los Angeles that would unsettle both audiences and authorities. Dementia, a dialogue-free psychological horror experiment, hit theaters like a fever dream. Director John Parker financed this surreal vision himself, filming guerrilla style across the city's darkest corners. Its wordless terror proved too much for censors. Cities across the U.S. banned the film, and the New York State Film Board refused to grant exhibition licenses. The film's dreamlike violence and psychological intensity were deemed too disturbing for public viewing, effectively ending its theatrical run. Parker's experimental style, relying on music, sound effects, and stark visuals, anticipated techniques seen in later cult classics. But unlike those films, Dementia disappeared into obscurity, strangled by moral panic. Its survival depended on underground collectors and a few archival holdings. Throughout the 60s and 70s, grainy prints circulated among avant-garde and horror enthusiasts. Some collectors reportedly paid exorbitant sums for bootleg copies, treating them like forbidden treasures. By the 1980s, film historians rediscovered Dementia. What had once been condemned was now hailed as a visionary work. The very elements that terrified censors, its surrealism and psychological depth, cemented its legacy as a pioneering piece of experimental horror. In 1959, a creature emerged from the depths of obscurity, not for its fright factor, but for its improbable survival. The monster of Piedras Blancas slithered out of coastal California on a shoestring budget, yet Jack Kevin's rubber suit monster design left a lasting impression. The film's theatrical run was brief and regional, screened in small-town theaters before vanishing into the void that claimed many B-movies of the era. While major studio films found homes in archives and reruns, this coastal creature feature teetered on extinction. Its survival relied on a network of collectors who preserved battered 16mm reels, often incomplete and worn from years of underground screenings. Kevin's monster suit refused to stay buried. The costume resurfaced in other low-budget productions, a common practice among B-movie studios trying to stretch every dollar. Though its exact journey is hard to trace, its distinctive design left a mark. For decades, the only way to witness the creature's rampage was through fan-circulated bootleg tapes, grainy, fragmented copies that added to the film's mystique. These underground networks kept the film alive when official channels had long forgotten it. Then, in the early 2000s, a restored version emerged, revealing details lost to time and reigniting interest among cult film fans who appreciated the earnest craftsmanship behind the monster's primal design. In 1959, something bizarre crawled out of Tokyo's film studios, a grotesque collaboration that would haunt monster movie fans for decades. The Manster was born from a partnership between American producer George Breakston and director Kenneth Crane, marking one of the earliest American-Japanese horror co-productions before the kaiju craze took off. The plot was pure madness. a journalist injected with a serum that turns him into a two-headed creature. Shot entirely in Japan with a mixed cast, the Manster was a cultural mashup that followed in the footsteps of Godzilla, King of the Monsters, but veered into even stranger territory. When it finally reached American theaters in 1962, audiences were baffled by its surreal tone. Distribution was a disaster. With limited theatrical runs and no major studio backing, the film quickly faded, but monster movie fans refused to let it disappear. Bootleg copies, often sourced from TV broadcasts or surviving prints, were passed around like prized relics. These grainy versions became cult artifacts among genre devotees. Some believe the film's odd premise and chaotic production made it too strange for mainstream success, but too fascinating to forget. Film historians later recognized The Manster as a unique East meets West creation that captured both cultures' monster movie sensibilities. Restoration efforts eventually brought cleaner versions to new audiences, transforming a whispered legend into a bona fide cult classic. In 1943, while Europe burned under the weight of war, French cinema birthed a nightmare that would haunt underground horror circles for decades. La Main du Diable, later known as Carnival of Sinners, emerged from wartime France as a macabre tale of cursed hands and Faustian bargains that would captivate audiences, then nearly vanish from international view. The film's supernatural horror struck a chord with European viewers, but wartime censorship and export restrictions strangled its global reach. The chaos of war created a perfect storm for cinematic obscurity, leaving many prints scattered or inaccessible across the continent. American audiences remained largely unaware of its existence, missing out on what film historians now recognize as a pivotal work in French horror cinema. While French archives preserved the film, it became a ghost story beyond France's borders. International horror aficionados discovered it through art house retrospectives and underground film societies where bootleg copies circulated like forbidden relics. These grainy, subtitled prints became the stuff of legend. Collectors would trade them in basement screenings, keeping the film's memory alive in cult cinema circles. The movie's expressionistic visuals and haunting themes of moral corruption influenced later horror auteurs, despite its near-invisible status in mainstream international cinema. Some film historians suggest that directors like Georges Franju may have drawn inspiration from its macabre imagery, creating a hidden lineage of French horror that traced back to this wartime masterpiece. The 1980s brought renewed international recognition as film preservation efforts expanded and interest in classic French cinema grew. Suddenly, this overlooked nightmare found new life, earning recognition as a forgotten classic of French horror, rescued from international obscurity by the persistence of cinephiles who refused to let it fade. The Four Skulls of Jonathan Drake emerged from Paramount Pictures in 1959, carrying themes of colonial guilt and supernatural revenge that mainstream audiences weren't quite ready to confront. This voodoo-infused chiller featured imagery that pushed the boundaries of 50s horror: shrunken heads, decapitated corpses, and ancient curses that turned family bloodlines into battlegrounds. Its brief theatrical run left it largely overlooked by the public, but its eerie visuals and atmospheric storytelling caught the attention of dedicated horror collectors. While documentation is scarce, some believe television stations avoided airing it due to its disturbing content, deeming it too intense for the era's conservative broadcast standards. What followed was a testament to fan devotion. The film faded from public view, surviving primarily through the efforts of genre enthusiasts who preserved rare 16mm prints and shared them at conventions and private screenings. These collectors saw something unique in the film's haunting score by Paul Dunlap and its bold attempt to merge colonial history with supernatural folklore. Bootleg copies became underground currency among horror fans, passed hand to hand like sacred relics. Later critics praised the film's unsettling tone and moody atmosphere, recognizing it as an underappreciated gem of 50s horror. A long-awaited DVD release eventually brought The Four Skulls of Jonathan Drake back into the light, proving that some stories refuse to be forgotten. The Maze stands as one of cinema's most fascinating disappearances, a 1953 horror experiment that pushed three-dimensional boundaries only to vanish into the mists of film history. Director William Cameron Menzies, the visionary behind Things to Come and Invaders from Mars, crafted something genuinely eerie with this tale of a cursed Scottish castle. Menzies designed the film's labyrinthine interiors specifically for three-dimensional viewing, creating surreal, dreamlike visuals that some critics hailed as groundbreaking. The castle's twisted corridors and impossible geometry were meant to disorient viewers, using the new technology in ways that diverged from flashier contemporaries like House of Wax. But timing was unkind. Released alongside better-funded three-dimensional spectacles, the maze was overshadowed by marketing muscle and star power. After a short theatrical run, it all but disappeared. Only a few three-dimensional prints survived in private hands, while most horror fans had to settle for bootleg two-dimensional versions passed through underground circles. Those grainy copies kept the legend alive. Horror buffs whispered about the film's bizarre twist ending, a revelation so strange it became cult folklore. Some believe the ending's sheer absurdity contributed to its commercial failure, as audiences weren't ready for Menzies' surreal vision. The story took a surprising turn in the 2010s when a restored three-dimensional version premiered at film festivals, introducing new generations to this lost gem of experimental horror. In 1958, a British-Canadian horror film called Fiend Without a Face unleashed something cinema had never seen before. Disembodied brains with spinal cord tails crawling across the screen, pulsating with grotesque life. The film's stop-motion creatures, crafted by German special effects artist K.H. Strobel, stunned audiences with their graphic violence and disturbing realism. These weren't your typical monsters. They were anatomically detailed brain creatures that strangled victims with their spinal cords, creating scenes so intense that censors quickly intervened. The British Board of Film Censors demanded edits and issued an X certificate, while American distributors also faced pressure to tone down the content. The uncut version became increasingly rare, especially in the UK, turning Fiend Without a Face into a prized artifact among horror fans. Bootleg copies circulated for decades, passed between collectors at conventions and midnight screenings, while late-night TV airings helped build its cult reputation. Even censored versions left a mark. The film's innovative creature effects influenced future filmmakers, proving that even restricted art can leave a lasting legacy. Some argue that its underground status only amplified its mystique, transforming it into a legend that outgrew its modest origins. When Criterion released a fully restored version on DVD in 2002, Fiend Without a Face finally claimed its rightful place in horror history, no longer just a whispered tale among collectors, but a celebrated example of macabre ingenuity. The Screaming Skull arrived in theaters in August 1958 with one of the boldest marketing gimmicks in horror history, a promise of free burial for anyone who died of fright while watching the film. Directed by Alex Nichol, this independently produced ghost story emerged from the scrappy world of B-movie filmmaking, where imagination often outweighed budget. Without major studio support, the film quickly faded from mainstream theaters, relegated to drive-ins and second-run houses before vanishing from commercial circulation. Most audiences never got the chance to test that infamous burial guarantee. But the skull refused to stay buried. Horror fans and collectors became its unlikely champions, circulating battered 16mm prints and grainy VHS copies through underground networks. These unofficial channels kept the legend alive when official distribution had all but disappeared. Late-night horror TV shows in the 70s and 80s became the film's natural home. Its eerie atmosphere and that unforgettable skull prop, rumored to be an actual human skull, earned it a devoted following. The speculation surrounding real human remains only deepened its unsettling allure. For years, finding a legitimate copy meant navigating the shadowy world of bootleg dealers and horror conventions. The film lingered in cinematic limbo until a restored DVD release finally resurrected it, proving that fan devotion can breathe new life into forgotten nightmares. Columbia Pictures released The Man Who Turned to Stone in 1957, a chilling tale of immortal scientists who drain the life force from asylum inmates to maintain their eternal existence. It debuted during a crowded year for horror, with major titles like The Curse of Frankenstein dominating attention and pushing this eerie gem into the shadows. The film vanished from mainstream circulation with surprising speed. Television networks showed little interest in airing it, leaving horror fans to search desperately for any trace. What saved the man who turned to stone from total disappearance was the dedication of collectors who preserved worn 16mm prints. These battered reels became prized possessions in underground horror circles, traded at conventions and secret screenings. Some claim these bootleg prints include alternate scenes or extended footage not seen in theaters, though such rumors remain part of collector folklore. The film's moody atmosphere and morally complex narrative gradually attracted a loyal cult following. Its exploration of scientific hubris and ethical decay resonated with viewers who favored psychological horror over cheap thrills. For decades, the only way to experience this petrifying tale was through fan-circulated videotapes and reels passed like forbidden knowledge. Redemption came in the early 2000s when Columbia released a restored version as part of their Icons of Horror collection, introducing a new generation to this nearly forgotten story. In 1961, while major studios churned out black and white monster flicks, an independent production called The Dead One quietly broke ground as one of America's earliest color zombie films. Shot in the eerie bayous of New Orleans on a shoestring budget, this southern gothic nightmare blended voodoo rituals with undead terror in ways mainstream Hollywood avoided. Director Barry Mahan scraped together funding from local investors and filmed guerrilla style in authentic Louisiana locations. The murky swamps and decaying plantation houses provided a haunting backdrop that no studio could replicate. Despite its innovative use of Eastman color to depict rotting flesh and blood-soaked ceremonies, The Dead One failed to secure major distribution. Theater chains reportedly found it too graphic, too strange, and too steeped in real folklore for mass appeal. After a limited run, the film vanished. Only a few prints survived in private collections, making it nearly extinct by the 1970s. But horror fans refused to let it die. Bootleg copies circulated through mail-order catalogs and conventions, traded among zombie film completists who recognized its atmospheric power and pioneering spirit. Rediscovered in the 1990s, the film gained renewed attention from horror historians. Critics acknowledged The Dead One as a trailblazer in American color zombie cinema, predating Romero's Revolution. Some speculate Barry Mahan's ties to Louisiana ran deeper than location scouting, hinting at real voodoo influences behind the film's unnerving rituals. Its scarcity transformed it from forgotten oddity to collector's treasure, with original prints fetching high prices at auction. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave a like and comment. Also consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell to get notified of our new videos each week. Thanks for watching.